She was a struggling seamstress barely making rent when Chicago's most feared mobster walked into her shop with a torn Armani suit and an impossible deadline. What started as a joke, "Fix this suit and I'll marry you," turned into a dangerous game of passion and power that would transform both their worlds. But when the FBI came knocking, could their forbidden love survive the ultimate test of loyalty? I hunched over my sewing machine in the back room of Angelina's alterations, my fingers stiff from 12 hours of work. The single light bulb above me flickered, casting shadows that danced across half-finished dresses and suits waiting for their owners. Outside, Chicago's winter winds rattled the windows, but inside, all I heard was the steady hum of my machine and Angelina's Italian radio playing softly from the front room. "Sophia, it's past 7, Angelina called, her voice tired but kind. "You should go home, Kara." "Just one more stitch," I said, not looking up from Mrs. Peterson's blue dress. The truth was, I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment where bills covered my kitchen table like fallen leaves. At 27, my life was as plain as the cotton shirts I hemmed each day. Wake up at 5, walk 6 blocks to the shop, sew until my back ached, then trudge home to eat soup alone at my small table. Every day was the same, like I was stuck in a loop I couldn't break. I carefully folded Mrs. Peterson's dress and placed it on the pickup rack. My real work, my designs, lay hidden in a drawer beneath scraps of fancy fabric I'd saved from rich people's clothes. Dreams drawn on paper that never seemed to come true. "You're too good for this little shop," Angelina would tell me when she caught me sketching. "Your hands were made for creating, not just fixing." I'd smile and nod, but we both knew the truth. Girls like me from Little Italy didn't become famous designers. We became wives or workers. And since Marco left me for that pretty waitress at Gino's last year, I was stuck being just a worker. I grabbed my thin coat and wrapped my old scarf around my neck. My apartment was 10 blocks away, and the snow was starting to fall again. "See you tomorrow," I called to Angelina, who was counting the day's money. Never enough, but just enough to keep the shop open one more day. The cold hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. I kept my head down and my hands deep in my pockets as I walked past shops closing for the night. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce from Tony's restaurant made my empty stomach growl. Back home, I climbed 4 flights of stairs to reach my apartment. The heat barely worked, so I kept my coat on as I made a cup of tea and opened another past due notice. The red letters seemed to shout at me from the page. I moved to my window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were wearing beautiful clothes at fancy parties, living lives I could only imagine. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and wondered if I'd ever find a way out of this life, or if I'd still be fixing other people's clothes when my hair turned gray and my eyes couldn't see to thread a needle anymore. The next evening, the shop was quiet, except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. I was finishing a simple hem on Mr. Rossi's pants when the bell above the door jangled so hard it made me jump. My finger slipped, and I pricked it with my needle. A drop of bright red blood welled up, and I quickly pressed a scrap of fabric against it. 3 men walked in, bringing with them the smell of rain and expensive cologne. They wore black suits that I could tell right away cost more than I made in 3 months. 2 of them were big, with thick necks and hands that looked like they could bend metal. They stayed by the door, looking around like they were checking for danger. The 3rd man was different. He wasn't as big, but he moved like he owned not just the shop, but the whole street. Maybe the whole city. His suit was perfect except for a tear along the right shoulder seam. His dark hair was slicked back, and his eyes were the color of strong coffee. When those eyes looked at me, I felt like he could see right through me to all my secrets. "We're closed," Angelina said from behind the counter, her voice shaky. She twisted her gold wedding ring around and around her finger, something she only did when she was scared. The man smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I need this fixed. He held up the torn jacket. Tonight. I recognized his face then from the newspapers. Dominic Ricci. The papers always talked about him when they wrote about mob business in Chicago, though they never could prove he did anything wrong. Charges against him always disappeared like magic. "I'm sorry, sir," Angelina started to say, "but I'll pay double," he cut in. His voice was softer than I expected, smooth like good whiskey. Angelina looked at me with worry in her eyes. We needed the money. The rent on the shop was late again. "I can do it," I said, stepping forward. I don't know where I found the courage to speak. His dark eyes looked me up and down, taking in my simple blue dress with its worn elbows, my hair pulled back in a messy bun, my hands red from work. Most rich men looked through me like I was made of glass. He looked at me like I was real. "It's for an important meeting," he said. "I need it by midnight." I looked at the tier. The fabric was expensive, the kind that shows every mistake. It would take careful work, tiny stitches that wouldn't show, and the shoulder would need to be partly taken apart and put back together. "That's impossible," I said before I could stop myself. No one could fix this properly in 4 hours. Something flashed in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. People probably didn't say no to him very often. "Fix this suit," he said with a dangerous smile that made my heart beat faster, "and I'll marry you." The two men by the door laughed. I felt my cheeks get hot. He was making fun of me, this rich, powerful man who could snap his fingers and get whatever he wanted. Something inside me, my pride, or maybe just craziness, made me stand up straighter and look him right in the eyes. "I'll have it ready by 11, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He raised one eyebrow like he was seeing me for the first time. He slipped off the jacket and handed it to me. His shirt was crisp and white against his olive skin. A gold watch gleamed on his wrist. "Where should I pick it up?" he asked. "I'll deliver it myself," I said, not sure why I was offering. He nodded and wrote an address on a card from his pocket. His handwriting was neat and slanted. 11 o'clock, he said. "Don't be late." As he turned to leave, he stopped at the door and looked back at me. "What's your name?" "Sophia," I said. "Sophia Russo." "Don't disappoint me, Sophia Russo." The way he said my name made it sound important. After they left, Angelina grabbed my arm. "Sophia, what are you thinking? Do you know who that was?" "I know exactly who that is," I said, already examining the tier. "And I know we need the money." "Not this money," she hissed. "These people are dangerous." "It's just a jacket," I said. But we both knew it wasn't just a jacket anymore. For the next 4 hours, I worked like I had never worked before. I carefully took apart the shoulder seam, fixed the tear with tiny stitches no one would see, and put it all back together. My back ached and my eyes burned, but I didn't stop. Not even when Angelina left, shaking her head and making me promise to lock up. By 10:30, it was done. The jacket looked perfect, maybe even better than before. I had adjusted the shoulder slightly to fit his frame better. I changed into my one nice dress, dark green with small pearl buttons up the front, and pinned my hair up more neatly. In the bathroom mirror, I pinched my pale cheeks to give them some color and bit my lips to make them pinker. "This is business," I told my reflection. "Just business." The address was in the fancy part of downtown. I had to take 2 buses to get there, hugging the jacket close to protect it from the rain that was still falling. The neighborhood got nicer with each block. Clean sidewalks, doormen in uniforms, shiny cars parked along the street. The address led me to a restaurant called Salvatore's, with gold letters on the window and heavy red curtains hiding what was inside. The sign said closed, but I could see lights on. My watch said 10:55. I was on time. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure anyone could hear it. What was I doing here? This wasn't my world. These weren't my people. But it was too late to turn back now. The door opened, and one of the big men from before looked down at me. "The boss is waiting," he said, stepping aside to let me in. I walked in clutching the jacket, feeling like I had just stepped off the edge of my small, safe world into something much bigger and more dangerous. The restaurant looked empty, but felt alive with secrets. The big man led me through a kitchen where a chef in white worked alone at a stove, the smell of garlic and wine filling the air. My shoes clicked on the shiny floor as we walked past pots hanging from the ceiling and knives lined up in neat rows. No one spoke to me or even looked my way, like I was just a ghost passing through. We stopped at a heavy wooden door and the man knocked twice. My stomach twisted into knots. I almost turned and ran, but then I heard Dominic's voice from inside. "Come in." The big man opened the door for me but stayed outside as I stepped into a private dining room. The lights were low, and candles flickered on a table set with shiny plates and crystal glasses. Dominic Ricci sat alone at the head of the table, his white shirt open at the collar, no tie. He stood when he saw me, and I noticed how tall he was without really meaning to. "Sophia Russo," he said my name like he was tasting it. "Right on time." I held out the jacket with hands that I hoped weren't shaking. "As promised." He took it and walked to a mirror on the wall. He put it on slowly, buttoning it with careful fingers. He turned this way and that, checking how it fit. "This is..." He paused, running his hand over the shoulder where the tear had been. "This is exceptional work." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you." I took a step backward toward the door. "If that's all?" "Stay," he said. It wasn't quite a question, but not quite an order either. "Have dinner." I glanced at my watch. "It's nearly midnight." "And you haven't eaten." His eyes moved over my face, seeing too much. "Neither have I." Every warning bell in my head was ringing. This man was dangerous. This world was not mine. But my feet didn't move toward the door. Instead, I found myself sitting in the chair he pulled out for me. The chef appeared with plates of pasta so thin and delicate it almost melted on my tongue. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the first bite. Dominic poured dark red wine into my glass from a bottle with no label. "Tell me about yourself," he said, watching me over the rim of his glass. "There's nothing to tell," I said, looking down at my plate. "Everyone has a story, Sophia." The way he said it made me look up. His eyes were serious, waiting. And for some reason, I started talking. I told him about my parents who came from Italy with nothing but dreams. How my father worked in a factory until his hands were too stiff to move, and my mother cleaned houses for rich people. How they saved every penny so I could go to school. "They wanted me to be a teacher," I said, twirling pasta around my fork. "Safe, respectable. But I always loved making things with my hands." I told him how I learned to sew from my grandmother, making dresses for my dolls from scraps. How I dreamed of designing real clothes someday. How I ended up at Angelina's after my parents died, just trying to make enough to live. I even told him about Marco, who promised to help me open my own shop someday, but left when a pretty waitress with rich parents smiled at him. "His loss," Dominic said simply. As the chef cleared our plates, I realized I had been talking for nearly an hour. "I'm sorry," I said, embarrassed. "You didn't ask for my life story." "I asked for exactly that," he said. "And you gave it to me." He stood and helped me from my chair. As we walked to the door, he took an envelope from his pocket and held it out to me. "For your work?" I opened it and nearly gasped. Inside was enough money to pay 3 months' rent on my apartment. "I can't accept this," I said, trying to hand it back. "It's too much." "You can," he said firmly. "And you will." His hand closed over mine, pushing the envelope back toward me. His skin was warm, and I noticed a small scar across his knuckles. "I have another job for you," he said, still holding my hand. "My entire wardrobe needs attention. Suits that don't fit right, shirts that need adjustment." "Mr. Ricci?" "Dominic," he corrected. "This isn't appropriate," I said, finally pulling my hand away. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "I'm not proposing marriage. Yet." His voice made it unclear if he was joking or serious. "Just business." I should have walked away. I should have said no. But the envelope in my hand felt heavy with possibility. "I'll need to see the wardrobe," I heard myself say. 2 days later, I found myself in the back of a shiny black car, driven by a quiet man named Tony. He didn't speak the whole way except to ask if the temperature was comfortable. I watched the city pass by, neighborhoods getting fancier with each block. We stopped at a tall building with a doorman who nodded to Tony like they knew each other well. In the elevator, Tony used a special key to reach the top floor. "The boss is in a meeting," Tony said as he led me down a hallway with soft carpet. "He said to make yourself comfortable until he gets back." He opened a door to what looked like a small apartment, but it was bigger than my entire building. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the whole city spread out below. I could see Lake Michigan in the distance, boats moving like tiny toys on the water. "This is all his?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the huge space. Tony nodded. "Mr. Ricci owns the whole floor." He showed me to a room filled with clothes, suits in every color, shirts stacked neatly, ties hanging in rows. "The boss said you should look through everything and make a list of what needs work." After Tony left, I stood alone in the closet bigger than my bedroom, running my fingers over fabric softer than anything I'd ever touched. I felt like I had stepped into another world. One where people lived above the clouds and never worried about paying bills. I took out a small notebook from my purse and started making notes about each piece. Many of the suits were expensive but fit poorly, too wide in the shoulders, too long in the sleeves. I could fix them all, make them perfect. I was so focused on my work that I didn't hear him come in. "What do you think?" Dominic's voice startled me, and I dropped the suit I was holding. He stood in the doorway watching me with those dark eyes. He had taken off his jacket, and his sleeves were rolled up to show strong forearms. "You have beautiful clothes," I said carefully. "But they don't fit you well." A smile tugged at his mouth. "That's why you're here." "I've made a list," I said, holding up my notebook. "I can take them back to the shop and—" "No," he cut in. "You'll work here." I blinked at him. "Here? I've had a room prepared." He motioned for me to follow him. Down the hall, he opened another door to reveal a bright room with windows on 2 sides. In the center sat a sewing machine nicer than any I had ever seen, surrounded by tables for cutting fabric. Mannequins stood in the corners, and shelves held threads in every color. "Is this all for me?" I asked, stepping into the room that felt like a dream come true. "For the work you'll do," he said, but his eyes were warm when he looked at me. "Is it acceptable?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good," he said. "You'll start tomorrow. Tony will pick you up at 9. As I turned to leave, he added, "And Sophia, wear something comfortable. I think you'll be here a long time." Walking back to the elevator, I felt like I was balancing on a tightrope high above the ground. One wrong step, and I would fall. But for the first time in years, I also felt like I was moving forward. For 3 weeks, I spent my days in that bright room with the fancy sewing machine, turning Dominic Ricci's expensive but ill-fitting clothes into garments that suited his powerful frame. I took in waists, adjusted shoulders, and hemmed pants to the perfect length. Each day, Tony would pick me up in the black car, and each evening, he would drive me home. I never saw where Dominic went during the days, but somehow, He always seemed to appear in the doorway of my sewing room just when I was finishing for the day. "How about dinner?" he would ask, like it was the most normal thing in the world for someone like him to eat with someone like me. At first, I made excuses. I was tired, I needed to get home, I had other work to do. But by the second week, I stopped fighting it. We would eat in his dining room with its view of the city lights, or sometimes in small restaurants where the owners greeted him like an old friend and always had the best table waiting. "Why do you live so far away when you work so much in the city?" he asked one night over plates of steaming risotto. "It's where I can afford," I said simply, not looking up from my food. The next day, I found a key card on my sewing table with a note in his neat handwriting. "For late nights. Guest room is yours if needed." I didn't use it that day, or the next, but when a storm hit Chicago the following week and the train stopped running, I found myself sleeping in a guest room bigger than my entire apartment, on sheets softer than anything I had ever felt. I woke to the smell of coffee and found Dominic in the kitchen, reading a newspaper. He wore a robe over silk pajama pants, his hair not yet slicked back with the oil he usually used. He looked different. Younger. Softer somehow. "Sleep well?" he asked, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted one. "Yes," I said, taking the cup. "Thank you for letting me stay." "My pleasure," he said, and something in his voice made me look up at him. Our eyes met over the rim of my coffee cup, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his phone rang, breaking the spell between us. He answered it, his voice turning hard and businesslike as he walked from the room. That evening, as I worked on a navy blue suit jacket, I sensed him watching me. I looked up to find him leaning against the doorframe, his eyes on my hands as they guided the fabric through the machine. "Your talent is wasted on alterations," he said. Without thinking, I replied, "We can't all be crime bosses." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I froze, horrified at my boldness. But to my surprise, Dominic laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face from something hard and watchful to something almost boyish. "Is that what you think I am?" he asked, coming into the room and sitting in the chair across from my table. "The papers. Don't believe everything you read, Sophia." I bit my lip, my fingers still resting on the half-finished jacket. "What should I believe then?" He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Believe what you see with your own eyes." "What do they tell you about me?" My eyes took in his expensive suit, his manicured hands with that small scar across the knuckles, the gold watch on his wrist. But I also saw the way he treated his staff with respect, remembered their names, asked about their families. I saw how he read poetry before bed. I had noticed the books on his nightstand when I passed his room. I saw how he looked at me sometimes, when he thought I wouldn't notice. "They tell me there's more to you than what people say," I said finally. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Smart girl. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about the man behind the name that made people in my neighborhood cross themselves when they heard it. I discovered he ran legitimate businesses, restaurants like Salvatore's, real estate companies, import businesses dealing in olive oil and wines from Italy. But I also noticed the meetings behind closed doors, the hushed phone calls, the men who came and went with serious faces and bulges under their jackets that could only be guns. One night after dinner, as we sat in his living room with glasses of sweet dessert wine, I finally asked the question that had been on my mind since the first day. "Why me?" He looked at me over his glass, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Why you what? Why did you bring me here? Why are you—" I searched for the right word. "Kind to me?" He set his glass down and turned to face me fully. "You don't flinch," he said. "Most people do around me." "Maybe they have reason to," I said quietly. "Maybe." His fingers brushed against mine where my hand rested on the couch between us. But you see more. The touch of his fingers sent a warmth up my arm that had nothing to do with the wine. I didn't pull away, and neither did he. We sat like that, barely touching, watching the lights of the city below us. After that night, something changed between us. He would find reasons to be in the sewing room while I worked, reading papers at a small desk he had brought in, making phone calls where I could hear only his side of the conversation. Sometimes he would ask my opinion on his businesses, listening carefully to what I said as if my thoughts actually mattered. And I found myself lingering later, our dinners stretching into long talks about everything and nothing. His childhood in an Italian family with old-world values, my dreams of someday designing my own clothes, books we had both read, places we wanted to see. I discovered his unexpected kindnesses. He had put 3 neighborhood kids through college, paid medical bills for an old employee's sick wife, remembered birthdays of everyone who worked for him. But I also saw flashes of the other side of him, the cold anger when someone crossed him, the quiet conversations that ended with, "Make sure it's handled," the way certain people would shake when they had to tell him bad news. One morning, I arrived to find a package on my sewing table. Drawing supplies, sketch pads, beautiful colored pencils. "What's this?" I asked when he appeared in the doorway. "For your designs," he said simply. "The ones you told me about?" That night, for the first time, I showed someone my dreams, sketches of dresses and suits I had created in my mind, but never had the courage to make real. He looked at each one carefully, asking questions, offering suggestions. "You could do this," he said. "For real." "Maybe someday," I said, not really believing it. "Why not now?" I laughed. "It takes money to start a business, connections." "I have both," he said, his eyes serious. The offer hung in the air between us, tempting and dangerous all at once. A week later, he asked me to accompany him to a gallery opening. For appearances, he claimed, though the look in his eyes suggested something more. I wore a dress I had made myself, dark blue with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt. When I stepped out of the guest room, where I now stayed more often than not, Dominic went very still, his eyes darkening as they moved over me. "You're full of surprises, Sophia Russo," he said, his voice lower than usual. The gallery was filled with Chicago's elite, rich people in expensive clothes who looked at art they didn't understand, but would buy to impress their friends. Dominic moved through them like he belonged, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. I noticed how people watched us, some curious, some disapproving, all wondering who I was and why I was on Dominic Ricci's arm. "They're wondering if you're my new mistress," he whispered in my ear as we looked at a painting of swirling colors. I felt my cheeks flush. "Is that what I am?" He turned me to face him, his hand still on my back. "You know you're more than that." Before I could answer, a man approached us, tall and thin with cold eyes that reminded me of a snake. Dominic's body tensed beside me. "Ricci," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Moretti," Dominic nodded. "Art isn't usually your scene." "I'm branching out," Moretti said, his eyes sliding to me. "As are you, it seems." The two men stared at each other, and I could feel the hatred between them like heat from a fire. Moretti leaned in close to Dominic and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Dominic's hand tighten on my waist. Before I could process what was happening, the gallery erupted in chaos. People screamed and dove for cover as the sharp crack of gunshots filled the air. Dominic pushed me down and covered my body with his, shielding me as glass shattered and more shots rang out. When it was over and the police had come and gone, we sat in the back of his car, my hands still shaking. Dominic's face was like stone. But his hand trembled slightly as he reached out to touch my cheek, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. No, I whispered. Are you? They weren't aiming for me, he said, his voice cold with fury. They were aiming for what I care about. Our eyes met in the dim light of the car, and I knew then that what existed between us was no longer just business, no longer just fascination. It was something much more dangerous, something that could get us both killed. The morning after the gallery shooting, my hands still shook as I threaded my needle. The radio next to my sewing machine reported gang violence at local art event, but never mentioned Dominic's name. I jumped at every sound, expecting more gunshots, more danger. When Angelina called my cell phone, I nearly dropped it. Sophia, where have you been? Her voice was tight with worry. I haven't seen you at your apartment in days. I've been working, I said, watching the door in case Dominic appeared. A special client. Everyone knows who your special client is, she said. Mrs. Gallo saw you get into his car last week, and Mr. Vannucci said you were at Salvatore's together. My stomach twisted. News traveled fast in our neighborhood. It's just work, Angelina. Work doesn't get you shot at. I could hear the fear in her voice. It's in the paper today. Don't tell me you weren't there. I closed my eyes, remembering the sound of breaking glass, the weight of Dominic's body covering mine, protecting me. I have to go, I whispered, and hung up before she could say more. I didn't expect Angelina to show up at the building that afternoon, but there she was, arguing with the doorman when I came down to get some air. Her eyes widened when she saw me. So it's true, she said, looking me up and down. I was wearing a new dress, one Dominic had bought me after I admired it in a store window. What are you doing, Sophia? What are you doing with Ricci? The doorman looked uncomfortable. Miss, is this woman bothering you? No, Frank. She's my friend. I took Angelina's arm and led her to a coffee shop across the street. We sat at a small table in the back, away from the windows. It's just business, I said, wrapping my hands around a cup of hot coffee to stop them from shaking. His business gets people killed, she hissed, leaning forward. That man is dangerous, Sophia. His family destroyed neighborhoods like ours. They take what they want, and they hurt anyone who gets in their way. He's not like that, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I remembered the cold look in his eyes when he said, "They were aiming for what I care about." I remembered the gun I had glimpsed in his bedside drawer one day when I passed his room. You think you know him? Angelina shook her head. My uncle worked for the Ricci's back in the day. You know what happened when he wanted out? They broke both his legs and told him he was lucky. I didn't answer. I couldn't defend what I didn't know, and there was so much about Dominic I still didn't know. Come back to the shop, Angelina pleaded, before it's too late. I can't, I said, not yet. Her face hardened. Then God help you, because no one else can. I hadn't even made it back to the elevator when my phone rang again. This time it was my brother Marco. What the hell, Soph? His voice was loud in my ear. Ma's having a fit. She called me crying about you and some mobster. Hello to you too, brother, I said, pressing the elevator button harder than necessary. Nice to hear from you after 6 months of silence. Don't change the subject. What are you doing with Dominic Ricci? Do you know what he is? The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. I know more than you think. You know he's the reason Pop couldn't get work after the factory closed? The Ricci's owned the company that bought it and shipped all the jobs overseas. Pop was blacklisted because he spoke up. I froze, my finger hovering over the button for Dominic's floor. What are you talking about? Ask your boyfriend, Marco spat. Dad would roll in his grave if he knew. I ended the call and leaned against the elevator wall, my heart pounding. Could it be true? I pressed the button and the elevator rose, carrying me back to the beautiful prison I had willingly entered. Dominic wasn't home when I got back to the apartment. I sat in the sewing room, staring at the half-finished suit on my table, unable to pick up my needle. When my phone rang again, I almost didn't answer it. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? Sophia Russo? A man's voice, official sounding. This is Detective James Callahan, Chicago PD. My blood went cold. What do you want? I think we should talk. In person. About what? About your employer. And the shooting last night. I swallowed hard. I don't know anything about that. Maybe not, he said. But you know other things. Things that could help us. I have to go, I whispered. Ms. Russo. His voice stopped me from hanging up. People around Ricci tend to get hurt. Or worse. Think about that. He gave me an address, a coffee shop far from Dominic's part of town, and told me to come tomorrow at 3. Just to talk, he said before hanging up. I sat there holding my phone, feeling like the walls of the beautiful apartment were closing in on me. Even my mother called from Florida that evening, her voice thick with tears. Sophia, what are you doing with that man? That family destroyed neighborhoods like ours. Have you forgotten where you come from? I hadn't forgotten. But the Dominic they described, the cold-blooded mobster, the destroyer of lives, wasn't the man who left poetry books by my bedside, who listened to my dreams as if they mattered, who looked at me like I was the most precious thing in his world. When Dominic finally came home that night, I could sense something was wrong right away. His shoulders were tense, his eyes dark with worry. We need to talk, he said, loosening his tie. My heart jumped into my throat. About what? I'm sending you away for a while. He wouldn't look at me. Somewhere safe until this blows over. What do you mean, sending me away? I stood up, anger replacing my fear. I'm not yours to send anywhere. Now he did look at me, his eyes flashing. After what happened at the gallery, Moretti knows you're important to me. That makes you a target. Important how? I challenged him. What exactly am I to you, Dominic? He ran a hand through his hair, messing up its perfect smoothness. You know what you are. No, I said, stepping closer to him. I don't. Am I your seamstress? Your mistress? Your pet project from the poor side of town? You're mine, he growled, his hands suddenly on my arms, holding me in place. And I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent heat racing through my body. I'm not going anywhere, I said, meeting his gaze. Not until you tell me the truth. What truth? Did your family blacklist my father after the factory closed? Did you know who I was that first night in the shop? He let go of my arms like I had burned him. Who told you that? Is it true? He turned away from me, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. It's complicated. It's a yes or no question, Dominic. He downed his drink in one swallow. Yes. The Ricci family had interests in that factory. Yes, there was a blacklist. But no, I didn't know who you were that night. I found out later. I felt sick. When? After the first week? He turned to face me. But by then, it didn't matter. Already what? He didn't answer, just looked at me with those dark eyes that had always seen too much. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? He asked, his voice sharp. I need to think, I said. Away from here. Away from you. Sophia. The way he said my name nearly broke my resolve. It's not safe. Nowhere is safe, I said, my hand on the doorknob. Not even here. Maybe especially not here. As the elevator doors closed between us, I saw something I had never expected to see on Dominic Ricci's face. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. And despite everything, the warnings, the danger, the lies, Part of me wanted to go back to him. That was the scariest thing of all. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Detective Callahan in a dingy coffee shop, listening to him tell me how I could help bring down the Ricci family. "You're in a unique position," he said, sliding a plain card with his number across the table. "You see things, hear things, most people don't." "You're asking me to spy on him," I said flatly. "I'm offering you protection when it all goes south," he countered. "Because it will, Ms. Russo. Men like Dominic Ricci don't change. And when the storm comes, you'll want to be on the right side of the law." I took the card and left without promising anything. But as I rode the bus back to my old apartment, needing space from Dominic and his world, I couldn't stop turning the detective's words over in my mind. Was I just fooling myself about who Dominic really was? Had I fallen for a lie wrapped in expensive suits and sweet words? That night, alone in my cold apartment for the first time in weeks, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how a girl who had always played it safe, who had always done the right thing, had ended up caught between a mobster and the law with no safe way out. For 3 days, I stayed in my apartment, ignoring the constant ringing of my phone. Dominic called every hour at first, then sent text messages that grew increasingly worried. Tony came by twice, knocking on my door until my neighbors poked their heads out to see what was happening. I hid in my bathroom both times, not wanting to face him or the choice I knew I would eventually have to make. On the 4th day, I returned to Angelina's shop. She hugged me tight when I walked in, like she thought she might never see me again. "Thank God," she whispered against my hair. I was so worried. The familiar smells of the shop, fabric, steam, and Angelina's lemon candies, wrapped around me like an old blanket. I breathed them in, trying to find my way back to the person I used to be, before Dominic Ricci walked through that door and changed everything. "Can I have my old job back?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Angelina pulled back to look at my face. "Of course, Kara. Always." Her eyes searched mine. "Is it over then? With him?" I looked down at my hands, soft now from expensive lotions, the nails neatly shaped instead of bitten short from worry about bills. Even my hands didn't belong to the old Sophia anymore. "I don't know," I admitted. That afternoon, I worked on simple hems and easy fixes, tasks that once filled my days. My fingers moved automatically while my mind wandered back to Dominic's apartment, to the sewing room with its perfect light, to dinners with views of the entire city, to dark eyes that watched me like I was something precious. Mrs. Gallo came in for a fitting and clicked her tongue when she saw me. "Back from your adventure with the devil, are you?" she asked loudly enough for everyone in the shop to hear. I felt my cheeks burn but said nothing as I pinned her dress. "Those Ricci men," she continued, "they take what they want and leave destruction behind. My cousin's restaurant, 40 years in business, burned to the ground when he wouldn't pay them protection money." "Mrs. Gallo, please," Angelina cut in, "let's not talk about such things." But the damage was done. I spent the rest of the day feeling eyes on me, hearing whispers when I walked past. By closing time, my shoulders ached from tension, and a headache pounded behind my eyes. "Don't listen to them," Angelina said as she locked up the shop. "People love to talk. But what if they're right?" I leaned against the counter, suddenly too tired to stand straight. "What if I've been blind, stupid?" Angelina's face softened. "Love makes fools of us all, Kara." "I never said I loved him," I protested. But the words felt hollow even to me. That night in my apartment, I pulled out my sketchbook, the expensive one Dominic had given me, and tried to lose myself in designs. But instead of flowing gowns and perfect suits, I found myself drawing him. The strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he really smiled. The hands that always seemed to find mine across a table or in a dark car. My phone rang again. "Dominic." This time, I answered. Sophia. Just my name, but filled with so much relief it made my throat tight. Are you okay? I'm fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Come back, he said simply. Please. I can't just pretend nothing happened, Dominic. Then don't pretend. Come back and we'll talk. Really talk. About what? About my father? About Moretti? About why the police want me to spy on you? The line went silent for so long I thought he had hung up. They approached you? His voice was dangerous now, cold in a way that reminded me of what everyone had been warning me about. Yesterday. What did you tell them? Nothing. I closed my eyes. But I didn't tell them no either. Another long silence. Do what you need to do, Sophia. His voice was flat now, all emotion carefully hidden. What does that mean? It means I won't stop you. If you think I'm the monster they say I am, then do what you think is right. The call ended, and I sat in my dark apartment holding my phone, tears running down my face. I didn't know what was right anymore. Everything had become tangled. My feelings for Dominic, my fears about who he really was, my loyalty to my family and my neighborhood, my dreams for a future that suddenly seemed impossible no matter what I chose. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I packed a small bag and took a taxi to Dominic's building at dawn. Frank the doorman looked surprised to see me but let me up without question. My heart pounded as the elevator rose, rehearsing what I would say, how I would demand the whole truth this time. But when the doors opened to the penthouse, I found chaos. Men I had never seen before were carrying boxes and files. Tony stood in the living room, directing them with sharp gestures. Where is he? I asked, my voice rising with panic. Tony turned, his face registering surprise and then something like pity. Gone. Left early this morning. Gone where? The room seemed to tilt under my feet. I can't tell you that, Miss Sophia. Tony wouldn't meet my eyes. Boss's orders. I pushed past him to the bedroom where Dominic had slept, where I had sometimes watched him from the doorway when he didn't know I was there. The closet stood open, half empty, shirts and suits missing from their neat rows. On the bed lay a single envelope with my name written in his neat, slanted handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a key and a short note. The sewing room is yours, for as long as you want it. Be safe. D. I sank onto the bed, the letter clutched in my hand. He was gone. He had left me behind. Just like that. No goodbye. No chance to explain or understand. Miss Sophia? Tony stood in the doorway. Boss left something else for you. In the sewing room. I followed him down the hall to the bright room where I had spent so many happy hours. In the center, where my table had been, stood a large package wrapped in plain brown paper. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a sewing machine. Not just any machine, but the finest one made. The kind fashion houses in Paris used, worth thousands of dollars. Beside it lay another note. For your dreams, whatever you decide about us. I pressed my hand against the smooth metal of the machine, cold and perfect under my fingers. A machine meant to create, to bring beauty into the world. Given to me by a man whose world contained so much ugliness, so much darkness. Tony cleared his throat. There's more, in the drawers. I pulled open the drawers of the sewing table to find bolts of the most beautiful fabrics I had ever seen. Silks, fine wools, delicate cottons. And underneath them all, a final envelope, thicker than the others. Inside was money. More money than I had ever seen in one place. Enough to start the business I had always dreamed of. Enough to build a new life, far from Chicago if I wanted. He said to tell you there are no strings, Tony said quietly from the doorway. His exact words were, tell her she's free. Free. The word echoed in my head as I stood in that sunlit room, surrounded by the tools of creation and the means of escape. But was I free? Could I ever be truly free when my heart remained tangled in a world I still didn't fully understand? That night, I sat on the floor of my small apartment, the key to Dominic's penthouse on one side of me, Detective Callahan's card on the other. Between them lay my sketchbook, open to a design I had created while thinking of Dominic, a suit that would fit him perfectly, that would show the world the man I thought I knew, not the monster others claimed he was. I realized then that no matter which path I chose, I could never go back to the person I was before. The simple seamstress with simple dreams had disappeared the moment Dominic Ricci walked into Angelina's shop with his torn jacket and dangerous smile. In her place was someone new, someone caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Not Dominic this time, but Angelina. "Sophia, are you watching the news? They've arrested someone from the Ricci family. They're saying a big case is breaking." I scrambled for my remote and turned on my small TV. There on the screen was a familiar face being led into the federal building in handcuffs. But it wasn't Dominic. It was his uncle, Antonio Ricci, the oldest of the family. The reporter was saying something about racketeering charges, about informants from inside the organization. I sank back to the floor, relief and confusion washing over me in equal measure. If Dominic had fled because of this, did that mean he was involved too? Or had he gone to protect someone? To protect me? The questions swirled in my mind like scraps of fabric in a windstorm, impossible to catch or make sense of. All I knew for certain was that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, fallen in love with a man I might never truly know, and now had to find a way forward in a world where nothing seemed clear or simple anymore. My gaze fell on the expensive sewing machine I had brought from Dominic's apartment, now sitting in the corner of my tiny living room. "A gift with no strings," he had said. But I knew better. Everything had strings, especially hearts. 3 days passed with no word from Dominic. The news talked of nothing but the Ricci family arrests. Antonio Ricci, Dominic's uncle. 2 cousins, a childhood friend who ran one of their restaurants. But no Dominic. His name wasn't mentioned in any of the reports, as if he had vanished not just from my life, but from the world itself. I tried to go back to my normal routine, working at Angelina's by day, sketching designs by night, but nothing felt normal anymore. My hands moved through familiar motions while my mind wandered to him. Where was he? Was he safe? Did he think of me at all? On the 4th day, as I walked home from the shop, a black car pulled up beside me. My heart jumped to my throat thinking, hoping it might be Tony, might be Dominic. But when the window rolled down, Detective Callahan looked out at me. "Get in, Miss Russo. We need to talk." The back seat of his car smelled like coffee and cigarettes. He drove 2 blocks before speaking. "Your boyfriend's gone missing," he said, eyes on the road. "You know where he is?" "He's not my boyfriend," I said automatically. "And no, I don't know." Callahan's mouth tightened. "We've got most of the family. Antonio's talking, the cousins are talking, but Dominic's the one we really want." "Why?" I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warm spring day. "If you got his uncle, why do you need him?" "Because he's the brains," Callahan said, turning onto a quiet side street and stopping the car. "The one who's been cleaning their money, making it look good on paper. Without him, we can't trace it all." I stared out the window at the brick buildings, so much like the one I lived in. Normal places where normal people lived. Normal lives. "What do you want from me?" "Call him," Callahan said, turning to face me. "Tell him you want to see him. Tell him you're sorry. You made a mistake. Whatever it takes. Get him to come back." The thought of betraying Dominic that way made me feel sick. And if I don't? Callahan's eyes hardened. Then we start looking very closely at you, Ms. Russo. Accessory after the fact. Money laundering. We know he gave you cash. Obstruction of justice. Fear crawled up my spine. You're threatening me. I'm telling you how things stand, he said. Make the right choice for yourself. He dropped me off a block from my apartment. I walked slowly, his words echoing in my head. The right choice. As if I knew what that was anymore. Back in my apartment, I stared at my phone. I could call Dominic. I was sure he would answer if he saw my number. I could lure him back, hand him to Callahan, save myself from their threats. Instead, I called someone else. Anthony Ricci, answered a gruff voice, so much like Dominic's, but rougher, older. Mr. Ricci, this is Sophia Russo. A long pause. The seamstress. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. What do you want? To help, I said simply. Another pause. Come to the house. 1 hour. He hung up before I could answer. The Ricci family home stood on a tree-lined street in the old Italian neighborhood, a 3-story brick mansion with wrought iron gates and stone lions guarding the steps. A man I didn't know opened the door and led me to a study at the back of the house, a room lined with books and smelling of leather and pipe tobacco. Anthony Ricci sat behind a massive desk, looking older than I expected. His hair was silver, but his eyes were the same dark brown as Dominic's, watching me with the same intensity as I sat in the leather chair across from him. So, he said, leaning back, you're the girl who has my son hiding in New York instead of here where he belongs. New York? The word slipped out before I could stop it. A small smile touched Anthony's lips. He didn't tell you where he went. Interesting. I haven't spoken to him since he left, I said. Yet here you are. Anthony studied me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Why? I took a deep breath. The police came to me. They want me to help them find him. To lure him back. And you're telling me this why? To ask for money? Protection? No. I met his gaze steadily. I'm telling you because Dominic deserves to know they're using me to get to him. I'd tell him myself, but I don't know how to reach him. Anthony's eyebrows rose slightly. You're not what I expected, he said after a moment. You're nothing like his usual women. I'm not his woman at all, I said, the words echoing our conversation from days before. Anthony's laugh was eerily familiar, the same rich sound as Dominic's, just roughened by age. That's not how he tells it. He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a phone, a cheap flip phone, the kind you could buy at any convenience store. He calls me every day on a different number. Too careful, my son. He pushed the phone across the desk to me. Today, you answer. I stared at the phone like it might bite. What do I say? Whatever is in your heart, Anthony said. Just know this. He was going legitimate, breaking away from, he hesitated, traditional approaches. It's why he's vulnerable now. Before I could ask what he meant, the phone rang, buzzing against the polished wood of the desk. Anthony nodded at me. I picked it up with shaking hands. Hello? Silence on the other end. Then, Sophia? Dominic's voice, confused, wary. It's me. My own voice sounded strange to my ears, thin and breathless. Where's my father? Is something wrong? He's here. He's fine. I swallowed hard. Dominic. The police came to me. Detective Callahan. They want me to help them find you. They threatened me. Another silence. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was cold with anger. Did they hurt you? No, just scared me. I looked at Anthony, who watched me with those familiar eyes. Where are you? Somewhere safe. A pause. You shouldn't be involved in this, Sophia. It's too dangerous. I already am involved, I said. I have been since that first night in the shop. I never meant for that to happen, he said softly. For any of this to happen. I know, I whispered. Anthony held out his hand for the phone. I passed it to him, and he stood and walked to the window, talking too quietly for me to hear. When he returned, his face was grim. He's coming back, he said, putting the phone back in the drawer. Tonight. But the police will be dealt with. Anthony's tone left no room for questions. Go to his apartment. Wait for him there. As I stood to leave, he added, You should know, Dominic was trying to protect you. From our world. From the fallout when he cut ties with certain business partners. That's why he left the way he did. How do you know that? I asked. Anthony's smile was sad. Because I know my son. And I know what love looks like, even when it's trying to hide. That night, I sat in Dominic's darkened living room, waiting. The city spread out below me, a million lights twinkling like stars. I had found Dominic's desk key hidden in the book of poetry by his bed. In the drawer was a hidden compartment containing a leather-bound ledger, a record of money moving through dozens of businesses, foundations, charities. Evidence of transformation, of a man trying to change his world one transaction at a time. I heard the elevator doors open at midnight. Then footsteps, familiar footsteps, crossing the marble floor of the entryway. When Dominic appeared in the doorway, he looked tired. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unstyled, dark circles under his eyes. But he was still the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. You're here, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. I'm here, I answered, standing. My father said you went to him, warned me about Callahan. I nodded. I couldn't let them use me against you. He moved closer, stopping just a few feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the stubble on his jaw. Why? You know why, I whispered. His eyes searched mine. Say it anyway. I took a deep breath. Because I love you. Even though I shouldn't. Even though it scares me. Even though I still don't know if I can trust who you really are. Who I really am. He repeated softly. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and touched my face. I'm the man who has been trying to fix his father's mistakes. Who's been moving money from illegal businesses to legal ones, cutting ties with the old ways? Who fell in love with a seamstress who saw him, really saw him, from the first moment? The police think you're the brains, I said. The one cleaning dirty money. I am, he admitted. But not to hide it, to transform it, to build something new, something clean. I placed my hand over his where it rested on my cheek. That's why your uncle was arrested? Because you were changing things? Dominic nodded. He didn't like the new direction. None of the old guard did. And now you've come back, I said. You'll be arrested too. Maybe. His thumb traced my lower lip. But I couldn't stay away. Not when Callahan threatened you. Not when you were brave enough to warn me. I stepped closer, closing the small distance between us. What happens now? Now, he said, his arms sliding around me. I face whatever comes. But first. He lowered his head until his lips nearly touched mine. First, I do what I should have done months ago. When he kissed me, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before, like finding something I hadn't known I was missing. His arms tightened around me, and I felt the beating of his heart against mine, steady, strong, sure. The next morning, Dominic walked into the federal building wearing a perfectly tailored suit I had adjusted myself. He carried the ledger in his hand. I waited in the car outside, my heart in my throat, watching as he disappeared through the heavy glass doors to face whatever justice waited for him. He had made his choice, and so had I. "I'll be waiting," I had told him that morning as he dressed. "No matter how long it takes." He had kissed me one more time before leaving. "Sophia Russo," he whispered against my lips, "if we get through this, that marriage joke might become serious." I sat in the car, the ring he had slipped onto my finger hours before catching the morning light. It wasn't a diamond, but a small gold thimble, like the one my grandmother had given me when I first learned to sew. Inside, he had engraved 3 words: "You fixed me." As I watched the federal building, I knew our hardest days were still ahead, but I also knew that some choices define us, not the easy ones that cost nothing, but the hard ones that risk everything. I had made mine. For better or worse, my heart belonged to Dominic Ricci. 1 year later, I stood in the center of my new shop on Oak Street in the Gold Coast. Surrounded by rolls of fabric in every color, mannequins wearing half-finished designs, and the soft hum of sewing machines. The sign above the door read, "Sophia Russo Designs," painted in elegant gold letters against deep blue, the color of the dress I wore the night Dominic first kissed me. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, casting warm light across the polished wood floors. My fingers ran over the silk of a wedding dress I was creating for a bride who wanted something different, daring. Once I would have been too scared to try such a design. Now I welcome the challenge. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see Dominic walking in, carrying 2 cups of coffee, our morning ritual. He wore one of my suits, tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders and narrow waist, the fabric a deep charcoal that made his olive skin glow. His hair was shorter now, less slicked, and a touch of silver had appeared at his temples during the months of legal battles. But his eyes were the same, dark, intense, seeing only me even as 3 of my assistants turned to look at him. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked, handing me my cup. The warmth seeped through the paper into my fingers as I breathed in the rich smell. Terrified, I admitted. What if they all hate the collection? Tomorrow was my first showing during Chicago Fashion Week. Buyers from major stores would be there, along with critics from fashion magazines and local newspapers. People who could make or break my new business with a few words. "They'll see what I see," Dominic said with such certainty that I almost believed him. He moved to the back office, once my sewing room, now the heart of our business, and I followed, watching as he reviewed the books. The shop was mine in name, but we both knew whose money had backed it. Clean money now, flowing through legitimate channels, carefully monitored by the terms of Dominic's plea deal. He had escaped the worst charges by turning state's evidence against his uncle and certain business associates, by opening his books to the FBI, by agreeing to restructure the family businesses under federal supervision. Some of his relatives still weren't speaking to him. Others had gone to prison blaming him for their fate. His father had stood by him, proud of his son's courage to break with the old ways, even as it cost them both dearly. "The Times is sending someone," I said, sipping my coffee. "And Women's Wear Daily." Dominic looked up from the ledger, his eyes softening. "They'll love you. How could they not?" His faith in me never wavered, even when mine faltered. Even when whispers followed us at events. About his family, about my background, about how a simple seamstress from Little Italy had suddenly opened a high-end design studio in Chicago's most expensive shopping district. "Sophia," Angelina's voice called from the front of the shop. "The fabric from Italy is here." I hurried out to find my old boss, now my partner and head seamstress, directing the delivery men with the same energy she once used to manage our tiny alteration shop. After Dominic's case was settled, the first thing I did was offer Angelina a place in my new business. The second was to hire 3 of the best tailors from my old neighborhood who had been struggling to find work. "It's beautiful," Angelina said. running her hand over the bolt of midnight blue silk. Perfect for the Rivera design. I nodded, already imagining how the fabric would flow, how it would catch the light on the runway. This was the part I loved most, seeing something in my mind become real under my hands, watching as flat cloth transformed into something that could make people gasp. That night, after everyone had gone and the shop was quiet, I sat at my work table making final adjustments to my favorite piece in the collection. A woman's suit inspired by the one Dominic had brought to me that first night, but softer, with lines that followed the body instead of hiding it. As I worked, I heard the door open and close. "We need to lock up soon," Dominic said, coming to stand behind me. His hands rested on my shoulders, warm and strong. "Big day tomorrow." I leaned back against him, needle paused mid-stitch. "Do you ever think about how we got here? How different everything could have been?" His thumbs moved in small circles at the base of my neck, easing the tension I hadn't realized was there. "Every day. If you hadn't torn your jacket that night, I'd have found another reason to walk into your shop," he said with such certainty it made me smile. "Some things are meant to be, Sophia." I wasn't sure I believed in fate or destiny, but I did believe in the power of choices. The choice I made to fix his jacket that night. The choice he made to leave the old business behind. The choices we both made to trust each other when the world told us not to. Our relationship remained complicated. Chicago society only partially accepted us, fascinated by the reformed mobster and his designer wife, but keeping us at arm's length, never fully embracing us as their own. My family was coming around slowly. My mother had finally visited from Florida, wary at first, but warming to Dominic when she saw how he looked at me, how he treated me as an equal, not a possession. Dominic's world still contained shadows. Former associates who glared from across restaurants, whispered conversations that stopped when we entered rooms. Federal agents who checked in quarterly to review his businesses. But there was light too. The legitimate restaurants and real estate companies now thriving. The scholarship fund for neighborhood kids that had tripled in size. The community center being built in Little Italy with Ricci family money. "I altered more than your suits," I often teased him when we were alone. "And I gave you more than a sewing studio," he would reply, pulling me close. Both statements held truth. I had shown him a path to redemption, to building something new from the ruins of the old. He had given me courage to claim my ambitions, to step out of the shadows of what was expected and into the light of what was possible. We walked home that night through the quiet streets. Our new condo was just 6 blocks from the shop, high enough to see the lake, but not so high that we felt removed from the city's heartbeat. As we passed Salvatore's, still one of Dominic's most successful restaurants, he squeezed my hand. "Wait here a moment," he said, ducking inside. When he returned, he held a small box wrapped in blue paper. "For you. For good luck tomorrow." Inside was a vintage thimble, silver with tiny roses etched around its edge, transformed into a pendant hanging from a delicate chain. I turned it over in my palm, feeling its perfect weight, substantial yet light, like the best parts of our life together. "Look inside," he said softly. Tilting it to catch the light from the street lamps, I saw tiny words engraved in the silver. "You fixed this suit. Now keep your promise." I looked up at him, confused. What promise? His smile was the real one, the one that reached his eyes and softened all his sharp edges. "The first night when I joked that if you fixed my suit, I'd marry you." "That wasn't a promise," I laughed. "That was you making fun of the poor seamstress." "Maybe then," he admitted, taking the necklace and moving behind me to fasten it around my neck. "But it's a promise I'd like to keep now, if you'll let me." The thimble settled cool against my skin, right over my heart. "Are you asking me to marry you, Dominic Ricci?" He turned me to face him, there on the sidewalk outside the restaurant where we'd first had dinner. I'm asking if you'll keep altering me, Sophia Russo, for the rest of our lives. I reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble against my palm. I believe you owe me a marriage, I said, for fixing that suit. His kiss tasted like possibility, dangerous still, but beautiful in its risk. We had remade each other, stitch by careful stitch, creating something neither of us could have imagined that first night. A partnership of equals. A love strong enough to withstand the past and brave enough to face whatever came next. As we walked the rest of the way home, hand in hand, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. How a torn jacket had led to a mended life, how the most unexpected thread could tie two people together, stronger than either could be alone. Tomorrow, my designs would face the world. My name would be judged by strangers who knew nothing of the hands that had created each stitch, the heart behind each fold of fabric. I would stand before them not just as Sophia Russo, designer, but as the woman who had dared to love Dominic Ricci, who had seen beyond the surface to the man beneath. "What are you thinking about?" he asked as we rode the elevator to our floor. I leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent that had become home to me. About how sometimes the most beautiful things come from taking the biggest risks. His arm tightened around my waist. Like falling in love with a dangerous man? I smiled up at him. Like a dangerous man falling in love with a simple seamstress. The elevator doors opened, revealing our life together, a space filled with my fabrics and his books, my sketches and his business plans, our shared dreams. Not perfect, not without shadows, but ours, created together, one careful stitch at a time. Some loves transform you, some are worth the danger, and some, the rarest kind, do both at once, leaving you forever changed, forever grateful for the risk you took when you first said yes to the impossible.